Today on the LowDOWN, the Down Syndrome podcast, Hina Mahmood gives us the lowdown on the many benefits of occupational therapy for people with Down syndrome. Over to you, Hina and Marla.
Thanks, Jody. I'm Marla, an SLP here at the Down Syndrome Resource Foundation and one of the hosts of the LowDOWN podcasts. Often parents that I work with have questions around things that don't really fall into the communication realm. Topics like attention or sensory-seeking behaviors, toileting, writing, bedtime routines, and dressing come up almost every day. Luckily, I have the great pleasure of working alongside Hina, and so I can direct these families to the people who can help them the best, and that's the OTs. Contrary to popular belief, OTs are not people who help match you with a job in the workforce. Today, I'm actually going to chat with Hina all about OT, and we will really get the lowdown on what OT can do to help individuals with Down syndrome. Hina is the senior occupational therapist at the Down Syndrome Resource Foundation, and she's been working here for many, many years now. And she actually worked in admin before going back to school to UBC for OT, so she's worked on both sides. And she came right back after her master's degree in 2016. Hina is also the co-chair of the Pediatric Special Interest Group for OTs in BC, and she also takes special interest in communicating the impact that medical issues have on everyday function for our students. And those issues are things like sleep apnea. Hi, Hina. I'm really excited to pick your brain today.
Hi, Marla. Happy to be here. It's kind of funny to be on the other side now, not being the host.
I know. I know. Get ready.
Yeah.
So Hina and I have many opportunities to collaborate throughout the day, and our offices are right next to each other, actually. And we really enjoy working together for students and their families whenever we can. Mm-hmm. And Hina, I have secret questions for you before we get started. So are you ready?
Okay, I'm ready. Go for it.
All right. What is your favorite Starbucks winter drink?
Ooh, well, I can't drink coffee, so I generally go for a coconut milk hot chocolate. Yeah.
Do you do peppermint hot chocolate?
Sometimes it just depends, because sometimes the peppermint ends up being more like toothpastey, so it just depends. But
Yeah,
a classic hot chocolate with coconut milk, I love.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And yes, you're just making me thirsty. What are you reading right now?
So I've been attempting to finish a book that is kind of on and off. It's called Educated by Tara Westover.
Oh, yeah.
So
that's a heavy read.
It's a heavy read, but it has a really cool concept behind it. So I'm hoping to finish it in the next couple of months at least. So.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What do you like to do on a sunny day?
Oh, if it's a nice sunny day, I love to go for a walk and listen to like a list of podcasts. That's like my way to mentally refocus and recharge my battery. So go to the seawall or even just around the neighborhood, listen to podcasts, have a warm drink, a Starbucks perhaps, or hot chocolate perhaps. And that's my ideal day. Honestly, I find it so mentally refreshing to do it that way.
Do you do OT podcasts or something else? What do you go for?
That's a good question. It's a mix. So I definitely have a couple of really good OT podcasts. I love true crime podcasts. And then just
like Serial?
Serial, or there's a great one from CBC known Somebody Knows Something, which I really like.
Oh, yeah.
And also just like lifestyle type blogs. So like the Doctor's Pharmacy, because I'm really into alternative health and functional medicine. So just it's a wide range for sure.
Cool. You're going to love this question. What, in your opinion, is the best song from the 90s?
Oh my gosh, that is a very hard question.
I know.
It's great that you know me so well that you know that the 90s are exactly my jam. I don't know if I'd be able to pick a favorite song, but I could definitely narrow it down to a genre because I'm a huge fan of 90s hip hop. So anything from TLC or early 90s Salt and Pepper, that kind of stuff I love. But anything 90s hip hop, I'm all about. So
it's got to be danceable, I guess.
It just has to have a good beat to it for sure.
Mm-hmm. And last question of our 5 secret questions: what is your favorite sports team?
Oh, well, being a Vancouverite, number one are my Vancouver Canucks. So I do love that hockey team. They've taken me on a very emotional journey of ups and downs. And then also, I'm not a big NFL fan, but I do love the Seattle Seahawks. So they've really made me enjoy watching football a little bit more. So Seahawks and the Canucks.
You're really sticking it as local as possible.
Absolutely.
That's the thing. All right. Well, thanks for letting all of our listeners get to know you a little bit better.
For sure.
I bet you they did not know that you like 90s hip hop, and now they do.
Now they do.
So that's awesome. Let's start at the very beginning. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? Because I gave you the tiniest of intros, but why don't you let our listeners know a little bit about your professional journey and how you ended up at the Dsrf in the first place?
Sure. So I think you had mentioned this a little bit earlier. I completed my undergrad in psychology at Simon Fraser University. And after I had finished schooling, I knew that I always known that I wanted to work with kids, and especially kids with special needs or developmental disabilities. My sister had cerebral palsy, so she was an impetus for kind of knowing that's the direction that I wanted to go in terms of my career. I heard about the Dsrf from a friend in undergrad who was volunteering there. And I said, oh, let's just check this place out. And through just a confluence of fun factors and just the stars aligning, I ended up actually getting hired to work at the front desk at Dsrf in 2008, which was great because it gave me the opportunity to earn money, but also work with some amazing staff and individuals with Down syndrome. So it kind of gave me the opportunity to interact with them. And in working at the front desk, I got the opportunity to help out with programs. And also really Dsrf is where I got introduced to OT. So I didn't even know what OT was.
So was it being at the front desk that made you decide that you wanted to do OT? Because at that time we didn't have any OTs and we just had SLP. So what gave you the motivation to go for OT rather than one of the other therapeutic disciplines?
For sure. So we, in the early 2008, Dsrf actually had started a pilot preschool program. And in that preschool program, we've had a couple of kiddos that required OT consultations to come in and give the preschool teachers some input. And so we had a person that used to work at Dsrf that had said, hey, maybe OT might be something you want to look into. And when I checked what an occupational therapist is and what they do, it was literally like somebody created my dream job, because every box was checked in terms of what I wanted to do as a career. So I started looking into it a bit more and then started the process of applying and eventually got accepted in 2014. And as you mentioned earlier, we didn't have an OT program at Dsrf at that time. So when I left Dsrf to go to UBC for my master's, in the 2 years that I was doing my master's degree, just the Dsrf started an OT program, and it just worked out so well that in 2016, once I finished, I was asked to come back and work as an OT and have been there ever since.
That's just a really cool mix of like happenstance and just being in the right place at the right time.
Absolutely,
and having somebody kind of show you a little glimpse of what it could be like. That's so cool. Let's get into a little bit about what OT is and what OTs do. So for our listeners who may not be familiar with occupational therapy, could you give a little bit of a description? Because occupation makes everybody think career.
Yes, job therapy, which it is in there for sure. So as occupational therapists, our goals are to enable people to engage in and perform occupations that are meaningful to them. So occupations could be anything that occupies your time. So as OTs, we work in a variety of settings: hospitals, schools, the community, industry and business, and even in the government. So occupations are those things that a person needs and wants to do in their everyday life. And generally fall into 3 categories. So it's self-care. So that includes things such as feeding, hygiene, dressing. Productivity is the second category. So work, volunteer work, things of that nature. And then the last category is leisure. So anything that you do for fun. So hobbies, community events, anything like that. And as OTs, we enable and engage our clients by adapting whatever task is that they need to learn, and adapting the environment to facilitate success. So we are trying to kind of look at a whole picture of the client and what's in their environment, but also because we're a client-centered profession, we're also then looking into what the client's strengths are, what their motivations are, and what their interests are, and how can we put all of that together in helping them become more independent and functional in their everyday life.
So from what you're saying, and I know this to be true, but I want to clarify it for our listeners, occupational therapy is an extremely customized therapeutic service. If you're really considering this individual's environment and this individual's personal motivations and their personal strengths and their personal challenges. So it's absolutely not a cookie cutter kind of thing.
Absolutely. Yeah, it
right?
is. Yeah, it's a client-centered perspective, but also a holistic perspective. So we really are looking at, each individual client and respecting their lived experience and honoring their lived experience, because they are, knowledgeable in their own lives. So they know what works for them, what doesn't work for them. And that kind of really, you never get bored as an OT, because there's so many different things that you can do for so many different people and in so many different ways. So definitely customizable, and the holistic nature is what I really, really appreciate about that profession. So.
So you mentioned previously that OTs even work in the government. So I feel like that kind of answers this question, which is, do OTs only really work with kids?
Absolutely. Yeah. So much like speech therapy, and correct me if I'm wrong, but OTs, occupational therapy is a profession that works with individuals across the lifespan. So
same as SLP.
Yeah. So at any point in an individual's life, they may need or require occupational therapy services. And as OTs, our goal is to be there for that particular need in the particular time and help our clients achieve independence and become more functional.
Okay. I mean, yeah, that makes sense to me, because your personal goals can really change as you develop as a person and grow up. And so you might need sort of different strategies or different adaptations to achieve your goals at sort of any different point in life.
Absolutely.
On the other end of the spectrum, is there a lower age limit? Like, do kids have to be over age 5 to start OT, or over age 3? Is there kind of a rule around that?
That's a really great question. And the answer is that a child can be at any age before they start seeing OT. So for example, at the Dsrf, I have seen clients as young as age 18 months old. I mean, I have colleagues that work with little ones in the NICU, for example. So it really just depends on what the goals are for that particular kiddo, and to really figure out, with proper assessment and collaboration with the parents and caregivers, what they need and want for us to work on with their kids. So to kind of answer your question again, and to summarize, no, you don't have to be at a particular age to start OT. You can start at any time.
Oh, that's cool. Because I think a lot of parents assume that, you have to be working on school goals or something like that. But what you're saying is really not, because even little kids are occupying their time with something. And so an OT would be able to help them.
Absolutely. Yeah. So for someone who's like an 18-month-old, their occupation is play. That's how they're occupying their time. So we can use that as a way to help build skills as well. Feeding also is another example where it is something that's occupying their time, something that is meaningful for them in their everyday life. So OTs can help in that regards as well.
Fantastic. That was a really awesome answer. So when you think about your job at the Dsrf, what are some of the key areas that you're working with for your students on a sort of daily basis?
Yeah, so for many of my younger kiddos that are, let's say, in the preschool age category, so 3 or under, and sometimes even younger, some of the areas of focus would include building those foundational fine motor skills. So the ability to use both hands together, grasping and manipulating objects of different sizes. A big one for our kiddos with Down syndrome is improving their core strength so they can sit unsupported. And other things such as overall balance and coordination are some things I could work on for someone in that age category. Feeding is also a key area of focus. If we move on to our school-aged kids, goals can include those academic-based skills such as printing, cutting, drawing. Toileting is a big one, and it's a podcast in itself to talk about toileting skills. Then also focusing on things like dressing skills, so buttons, zippers, and shoes could be a focus of mine on a daily basis. For some of our older school-age kids, we can work on things such as time management skills, maps, navigating the bus system, learning how to type, learning how to keep a schedule. All those things can be something that I work on a daily basis as well.
Wow. I mean, yeah, that's a lot. No wonder you're so busy. I think Yeah, it really makes sense though when you think about what is keeping a person busy at a different age group.
Mm-hmm.
After this break, we're going to talk about some of the areas in OT that are extra important for individuals with Down syndrome and sort of key issues that you really have to think about when working with this population. So we'll be back after the break.
Show the world you love someone with Down syndrome. Dsrf Down Syndrome's Wake Shop is stocked with shirts, baby clothes, bags, and more. Whether you're looking for World Down Syndrome Day products, Dsrf brand merchandise, or general Down syndrome items, we have what you're looking for. Love lives on 21st chromosome, and Down syndrome Wake lives at dsrf.org/shop.
My name is Andrew. I am the photographer. Photos are my interest because I love scenes. It makes me feel very close to people. My photos cards are on my IT shop through Andrew's eyes at dsrf.org/Andrew. Don't forget to watch my video through Andrew's eyes on YouTube.
So Hina, what are some of the key things that you have to think about as an OT when working with people who have Down syndrome?
Yeah, so I'm going to get a little technical here for a second, a little OT nerdiness here. But as occupational therapists, we typically follow what's known as a PEO model. So P stands for the person, E for the environment, and O for the occupation. So as OTs, this is a really good visual that I also use in presentations when I'm speaking to teachers, SEAs, and parents, but it kind of gives you a guideline of how to create goals for our students and how to help them learn. And optimal performance will occur when there's a really good balance between the person, the occupation, and the environment. So when all of those factors are taken into consideration, we can really see some learning and some growth. So for our clients with Down syndrome as an OT, I consider the person factors. So first we look at their motivations and interests. So what are some of their preferred activities or toys? We also consider their cognitive skills. We know that most individuals with Down syndrome have difficulty taking in, organizing, and remembering information. And, they've also demonstrated challenges with planning, reasoning, and problem solving. Another thing with person factors is their learning style. As we know, most of our kiddos with Down syndrome are visual learners, so their visual memory is stronger than their verbal memory, and they prefer repetition and sameness. So keeping those factors in mind. Several physical factors must be taken into account. Individuals with Down syndrome have low tone or hypotonia, decreased muscle strength, short limbs, hypermobility, sensory processing challenges, and a big one is those multiple medical conditions that can really affect how they, spontaneously move and learn motor skills. So keeping that P component in mind is important.
So I was going to follow up with you on that. Is that the reason that you're so interested in all of the medical ins and outs for people with Down syndrome, because it is such an important factor when you're considering that PEO framework?
Absolutely, yeah. So, we know that our kiddos have so many multiple medical concerns, gastrointestinal issues, vision, hearing. A big one is sleep apnea, and all of these things can really impact not only how they function in their everyday lives, but also how they're learning new skills. So, for example, if a kiddo has had a really, poor sleep the night before, it really informs me as a clinician why they're not being able to print something that particular day or able to complete a fine motor task that particular day. So when we're keeping those things in mind, it really kind of helps not only plan our sessions, but really understand what the expectation should be that particular time. So it makes a big difference.
So I have another question for you on that regard. Is the PEO model, is it a hierarchy or is it sort of a multi-directional model? And so my question is that if you don't take care of the personal factors and make sure that those are, as optimal as possible, are you even able to then go forward and consider the environment? Or is it like you have to, get square one sort of checked off before you can move forward?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great question. It's not a hierarchy. It is a multi-directional model. It's more just a framework to think about when we are understanding how a child or an individual will perform in their daily occupation. So we can't take into account PEO with everything. Sometimes it's going to be more the occupation, the O factor, or the environment, which is the E factor. But I think as OTs, our goal is to try to focus on each of those three factors as much as possible, just so that we can see how that impacts their occupational performance. Does that make sense?
That does make sense.
Okay.
So if I understand you correctly, what you're saying then is you have to at least consider all of the things in the personal area and feel like you can understand where those things are at in conjunction with how you can adapt the environment and or the task as well to help the person be successful. Is that how it is?
Yeah, exactly. So like if we consider, if we move on to the O, or the occupation factors, so the occupation is the task and its demands. So we have to think about what is involved in that specific task. You look at the steps and skills that are necessary. You also consider what that individual's skills are and how they can accomplish those tasks. So as occupational therapists, what we like is to adapt the task to fit the just right challenge. So you're pitching that task in a way that is not too easy, but not too hard. And the goal at the end of the day is pitching it in a way that facilitates success. And once our kids become more successful in those tasks, they're motivated to try that task again and get better at it. So that just right challenge is a really important part. And given any task in a session, I am going up and down that level of grading that task of difficulty in any given session. So if a person is having a tough time printing a particular word, then I'm figuring out how can I pitch it at a level that is still challenging them a little bit, but not so much that they're unable to accomplish the task and then they're not willing to do it again. So those occupation factors are really important to consider as well, and really looking at the task and what's required.
It's really interesting. You're kind of reminding me of sort of an analogous sort of structure or theory, which is like the zones of proximal development that they use in education, where you're trying to sort of scaffold the task and push the students so that they're learning, but not so far that they're going to shut down or become unmotivated or be upset and therefore wouldn't want to do that again or try that again. So you're trying to keep it within this just like perfect little window.
Yeah.
And you guys as OTs are sort of experts on task analysis. And I assume that you have to have a really solid understanding of what exactly you're asking of the student before you're able to make those adjustments on the fly.
100%. I'm so happy that you brought up task analysis, because that is like year one, term one OT stuff, because, it is so important to understand what is involved in a particular task before we can actually start helping our clients. So for example, let's say if you're taking the activity of brushing your teeth as a task. So if you really sit down and write down each and every step that's involved in brushing your teeth, from grabbing the brush and the toothpaste to opening the toothpaste, putting it on your brush, all those things, you'd be really shocked as to how many steps are involved in it. But we don't really think of that every time we do it because it's such an automatic task for us. But for our kiddos, we kind of have to then think, okay, yes, they're able to grasp the brush and the toothpaste. Yes, they can open the toothpaste cap, but are having a really hard time squeezing the appropriate amount of paste on the brush. So this is where the challenge is, and this is kind of where we'll come in and start our supports and our help. So that task analysis really helps us understand what is involved in each step and what skills and challenges the child has that might impede performance in that task. So yeah. So for that, it's
so you're basically looking at, like how far can they go on their own? And then if we take the toothbrush example, if I put the toothpaste on the brush, can they complete the rest of the routine on their own, or is it a continued breakdown from there? Is that right?
Exactly. Yep, absolutely. Yeah. And then finally, in kind of finishing up that POE model, the environment is also a super important component. So we've looked at the person and we've looked at what they're required to do. Now we have to kind of consider in which environment are they required to do this task. So, it can include the physical environment. So along with the availability of support. So teachers, support staff, in a school environment, if you're thinking about it, other students, or any adaptive equipment that is needed. So all of these things in the environment can have an impact on how the child is performing in that specific setting. At home, we would kind of have a similar idea. You're thinking about what are some of the available supports at home, parents, siblings, what are some of the adaptive equipment that might be needed at home to, complete a particular task. And at the end of the day, OT is a client-centered profession, so we really focus on what's important and meaningful to the client, but not only in terms of the goal, but how we achieve that goal.
So from the environmental perspective, we're talking all the things like equipment related, interaction related, if you will, like who's around that person. And then I'm assuming some of the sensory stuff, which we'll get into later, like how busy is the environment and all of those aspects, and how is that going to impact the student's ability to be successful. Am I on the right track with that?
You're absolutely on the right track. So if we take the school environment as an example, if when I go in for school observations or collaborations with teachers, we always kind of look at, okay, so we've taken care of the person component, we've taken care of the occupation component. From an environmental perspective, we would say, okay, so is the classroom too loud? Is it too visually stimulating? Do they have the right chair to sit on? Do they have the right adaptive pencil to use? So all those things kind of fall in that environment category. So anything that's not person or occupation related, but has an impact on performance at the end of the day. In the home environment, for example, if feeding is a task that we're working on, then we're thinking about, okay, how are parents approaching mealtime? Do they have the proper seating for mealtime? Are they getting distracted by noises or anything else going around in the house or in the kitchen? So just kind of looking at all those other components and how that can impact their performance is really important.
Well, this is really a fantastic way to consider sort of some of the challenges that our students have. So I'm thinking of, little or younger students in school, if there's an issue around like, oh, well, they don't do the writing task. And then thinking about it from the person perspective of, what's their health like? What's their motivation like? Are you considering those interests? And then the task itself. I mean, are you asking them to write a word or a paragraph? Can they even hold a pencil? Those kind of things. And then the environment of, is the chair or the seating correct? And, what else is going on around them? And I think from how you've described it, it makes a lot of sense, because if there's a breakdown in any one of those areas, our students are not going to be able to be successful for the most part, or just I guess, achieve their level of success that we would hope for them.
For sure. Yeah. And when I present to teachers and SEAs, I always try to say, think of the PEO model as like a problem solving tool. So if you're having a particularly challenging day with a student, just think about, okay, let's break it down. So for the person component, okay, did they get enough sleep? Are they feeling sick? Are they hungry? Are they thirsty? Are they in pain? And think of, what task you're asking them to complete on that particular day, and in what environment you're asking them to do it in. So if you can kind of view it from that perspective, it can really help problem solve a lot of issues as well. So you can kind of use it in a way where you're not only setting up a task, but also problem solving when a task doesn't go the way you want it to.
Totally. Yeah. And I think it sort of demystifies a lot of what some people call sort of stubborn behavior or just non-compliance or not participating. If you have such a broad problem-solving tool that looks at all of these different factors, absolutely you will be able to find at least one, if not multiple reasons for, the student not participating as well as we know that they could.
Yeah, exactly.
That is so fantastic. I love it. Yeah. I have a related question for you, and this is a question that people ask me on the regular, which is, why do OTs spend so much time changing the chairs that the student is using? What is that about? Yeah,
no, that's a good question too. I know we've had many talks of how you get this question asked to you all the time. So when OTs are asked to come in and, observe a child in the school setting or consult with teachers and SEAs, one of the first things I look for is positioning. Because of our kiddos and our individuals with Down syndrome have low tone and weak muscles, coupled with decreased core strength, proper seating is vital for them. So if you think about it, if they're not properly supported in their seating, they're wiggling, they're trying to figure out a way to, get that support in their posture, it's going to be very difficult for them to use their arms, their hands, and their fingers in a coordinated manner to complete fine motor tasks such as printing. They're just working so hard to stabilize their posture and keep themselves upright in their chair that all of their energy is going towards that. So it makes it really hard for them to then, pick up a pencil and print, or pick up scissors and cut a piece of paper. So often as OTs, we recommend simple fixes such as making sure that their feet are supported on the floor. If their feet are dangling, having like a footstool or something on the bottom to provide that support can really, really helpful. We also follow what's known as the 90-90-90 rule. So ensuring that elbows, hips, and knees are at a 90-degree angle when sitting down. And honestly, this goes for anybody sitting at any kind of desk. I often recommend this to you guys at Dsrf about making sure that your seating is at a 90-degree angle, because once our posture is supported and we're sitting in the correct chair, it reduces fatigue. It helps you do the work that you need to do more easily. So that's really why a chair and positioning and seating is so important for our kids.
So I feel like I have a little bit of an analogy for our listeners out there, because I feel like I can relate to this when I think about sitting on a really tall, like a bar stool or something that doesn't actually have a footrest.
Great analogy,
where you kind of feel like you're falling forward most of the time. And certainly if you're supposed to do something that's hard for you, like writing, when you also feel like you have to push against the table or push against something just to stay up on your silly little stool, then you're not going to be able to do your best at writing, and particularly not if writing is something that's hard for you to do. That is super interesting. I think when a lot of people think about core strength, they're imagining like you're making students do planks and push-ups, and that's not really it. So why is core strength such a key part of seating and then table work?
Yeah, so core strength is important because it helps support your body. So generally, our stability and our posture works kind of from the core and works its way outwards. So kind of using medical terms, it works from proximal, so right from where your core muscles are. And once those are strengthened, then they're able to support the upper extremities, so your elbows, your arms, your hands, and your fingers. So I think, there's so many different ways to work on core strength. It doesn't have to be planks or sit-ups or push-ups and something like that. There's lots of fun ways we can work on our core strength as well. But activating that core is so important because it really does allow you to use your other muscles in a more accurate way.
And I can draw a parallel in speech, because we also care about core strength in speech, believe it or not. And there's a multitude of muscles that are used in breathing and speaking. And if your core strength is very low, then you are recruiting the wrong muscles to help you breathe and speak. And sometimes we'll end up with really gaspy speech where the student needs to take a break to breathe in the middle of their sentence because they don't have enough strength to support their body in a vertical position.
Yep, exactly.
And then they're recruiting their sort of speech and breathing muscles to help them stay upright. And so, yeah, we also care about core strength, but I guess for a different reason, because we don't care so much about sort of arm and fine motor tasks.
And I mean, and core strength is also important for not only for when they're sitting, but when they're walking, So if you don't have a good, strong core, it's going to be really hard to execute movements with not only with your upper extremities, with your lower extremities too. A lot of our kiddos with Down syndrome have a hard time, going up and down stairs because of a poor core strength. They'll have difficulty stepping over on top of curbs when they're walking outside. So it really impacts how they motor plan and how they complete everyday tasks that are not necessarily always sitting at a table. So it definitely improving cores can help with overall functioning and accomplishing of tasks for sure.
And I assume, I guess, that it's also related to how quickly our students are going to fatigue. Because if I think of doing a really tough workout if I'm not strong, I'm going to, have a harder time making it through that workout, and I'm going to fatigue more quickly.
Absolutely.
And so if our students don't have appropriate core strength for their tasks, then, let's say they are writing, well, they're not going to be able to write as long or as accurately, or they are walking, but they're going to get tired. Is that how it kind of works
absolutely.
out?
Yeah, exactly. You got it.
Okay. Interesting. I'd like to talk a bit more about fine motor tasks. So we've kind of started the topic a little bit with core strength, but why are fine motor tasks like writing or eating with utensils, or even doing like little buttons and zippers on clothing, why are those things so hard for people with Down syndrome?
So fine motor tasks can be difficult for individuals with Down syndrome because they require so many skills, all having to be used together. And so many of these fine motor tasks, if you think about it, have multiple components or multiple steps. So let's take printing as an example. So if we think about printing, it involves multiple steps. So you should be able to sit at a table or a desk. You have to hold a pencil in one hand, stabilize the paper with your other hand, and then of course actually move your hand to do the written output, to print the letters and the numbers. Then if you think about the skills that are needed for handwriting, you have to have that core strength and that postural stability that we talked about. You should be able to use both hands in a coordinated manner. You need to have the skill of manipulating objects in one hand, so pencil and eraser being used in one hand. Hand and finger strength, so not holding the pencil too lightly, but then not holding it too tightly. And then skills such as visual perception and putting that visual and motor together. So trying to remember, what does the letter A look like? And then trying to recall, how do I need to move my hands to make the letter A, while also making sure that I do it at the right size with the right spacing. So if you think about it, something as simple as printing has so many skills and sub-skills involved that trying to coordinate them and make them work all together can be super difficult, especially for our kiddos with Down syndrome, because they experience challenges in so many of these areas. So, if you take into account these points and add on top of it the day-to-day medical issues we spoke about earlier, the demands of the environment and that motivation piece, really, like, are they even motivated to do the task? So when we take these points into consideration, we can really appreciate why it is so difficult for our people with Down syndrome to complete fine motor tasks, and why a lot of them are not always motivated or wanting to do them.
No, you make it sound very hard.
Yes, exactly.
What happens is people just forget, what it was like to learn how to write, or what it was like when you were learning how to do buttons and how hard that was for you at the time.
Yeah.
And, most of the population is quite fortunate to not have that level of medical complications.
Yeah.
Also, as a tick against them in their being able to complete tasks. So it does make sense why some of these things are so challenging. And, if core strength is a problem and hand strength is a problem, and we also know that visualizing as a skill is a challenge for people with Down syndrome, being able to anticipate what you want to do next. So that could be letters, or that could be like, I picture myself buttoning up my shirt with each button aligned with the correct buttonhole, and I know what that's supposed to look like. And that's a hard thing for people with Down syndrome too.
Yeah. And then, having said that, and yes, it is very hard for them to do, but I want to ensure everybody listening out there that it is absolutely possible for them to learn and succeed in these tasks. So it's just a matter of presenting that task with that just right challenge and providing the right level of supports and prompting and really making it motivating and fun. So if we kind of put all those things together, there's no reason why an individual with Down syndrome cannot do many, if not more, of those fine motor tasks and do them at an exceptional level. So it's just a matter of figuring out how we're going to teach them and how do we support them in that task.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because of course, most of our students with Down syndrome can write at some level, and often they can write at a really fantastic level. One of the things that I wanted to mention is, for a task like writing, you are not usually starting with a white piece of lined paper and a pencil at all.
No.
Because that's just a straight up no for a lot of our students, because they've been presented with that before. And so from, my spying eyes in my office next to yours, I see that you often do things, like very large and vertically or on the wall, or you get out some like really fun other things that are not a pencil, like we're talking paint, or we're talking super cool crayons or window crayons or whatever it is, to make that task more fun for the student. And then it gradually sort of moves towards like what we would consider to be like school writing.
For sure. Absolutely.
So I guess there's a pathway to get to, your end goal, which is write that paragraph on that piece of paper.
Exactly. Yeah. And then, even for some of my 2 or 3-year-olds that are not really ready to write any letters yet, there's still lots of foundational printing skills that we can work on, but it's just a matter of kind of thinking of printing, cutting, all these skills that we work on with our kiddos have a developmental sequence. So there is a step-by-step way to teach these things, but we just kind of have to take into consideration the person as well and where they're at, and how can we kind of marry the two together and make sure that, yes, we need to learn how to write your name, but let's first figure out how to do this component first, and then we'll work on to writing your name. So yeah.
And that's a way to make sure that you're at sort of the just right challenge level, so that you can keep that student engaged with you throughout that whole learning process.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I would really encourage any school teams who are having a hard time with some of those tasks that are usually, table tasks, like, oh, the rest of the class is writing, or the rest of the class is this or that, to get an OT on board with you to help you figure out a way to adapt that task or adapt the environment to make that task more fun or more manageable for the student.
Yeah.
So here's another sort of area that OTs work on, that I wanted to talk about next, because I hear the term kind of bandied about every day, and I think it needs some demystifying for people. And that term is sensory issues. So an OT can help with sensory issues. Can you kind of elaborate on what are sensory issues and what do OTs do with that?
Sure. So sensory processing is the ability to take in, organize, and make sense of that sensory information that's received by the brain from all of our sensory systems. And we have now 8 different sensory systems, and respond to them appropriately. So research actually suggests that approximately 49% of school-aged kids with Down syndrome experience sensory processing challenges. So compared to like 5 to 16% of the general population. So we know that this population definitely has some challenges and can experience differences in the way they process and respond to sensory information. And our goal as OTs is to understand how this processing of sensory information can impact how they learn new skills and how they interact within their environment. So, as an OT, if I have a client that comes in and I notice that there might be some sensory issues, or a parent or caregiver has reported some sensory issues, we generally would kind of start off with, like a quick assessment. The parents would fill out, an assessment and kind of let me know what they've experienced. Teachers can also do the same thing. And then we kind of work on understanding how we can provide these kiddos with the appropriate amount of sensory input that fulfills their needs, but also allows them to be functional in their everyday lives. So just kind of trying to find that balance.
Okay. I'm trying to think about a way to explain sensory issues. So you said there's 8 senses, which might be news to a lot of people. So we have the 5 we all learned in elementary school. And then what are those other ones?
Yeah, so you mentioned that the 5 senses we know of already. So sight, touch, taste, smell, and sound. But the 6th sense is one that really does impact a lot of our kiddos with Down syndrome, is known as proprioceptions. Really big word. And proprioception is that sense of body awareness. So proprioception is the sense that tells you where your body is in space, and how your muscles and joints are moving. So our proprioceptive sense is kind of telling me right now that I'm sitting on my chair, my hands are, rested on the table, my legs are on the floor. It's kind of giving me information where my body is in space. So that's a sense that can impact our kiddos with Down syndrome, because a lot of them have a very weakened proprioceptive sense. So they may not know where their bodies are in space. And this can kind of, you see this when you see our kiddos kind of, crashing and jumping into things, or, walking with very heavy feet. If they're putting down toys or objects on the table, they're putting them down, or really like they're almost like crashing it down. They're hitting things hard. So it's just them trying to figure out a way to understand where their body is in space. Does that make sense?
That does. So
Okay.
It's like, if you don't know like where your arms are in relation to like the table, for example, you might bang something down extra hard. Is that to give yourself feedback of where your arms are? Or is it
Exactly,
like you're kind of overestimating how far away it is, and so you're kind of crashing?
Yeah, no, I mean, yeah, it can be a bit of both, but definitely it's kind of giving you some feedback so you can get that sense of where your body is in space. So a lot of our kids that like to run and roughhouse or crash into things, they're trying to get that input into their body. And the goal of sensory processing at the end of the day is so that you can organize all of your senses in order to operate in the world. So an example that I sometimes use, and the best one that I can think of so far in terms of proprioception, is that feeling how in the middle of the night when you wake up and you feel like that restless leg feeling where you know your legs are there, but you don't feel them. So you kind of have to really hit your leg to be like, okay, almost like when your leg falls asleep. So you kind of, hit your leg with your hand just to kind of wake it up. But that's kind of one way that I can explain what poor proprioception might feel like, is just, it's there, but you need some sort of force of pulling and pushing against it so that you can really, your nervous system can register on your nervous system as to where that body is in space.
Sure. Talk about number 7. What's sense sort of number 7?
So number 7 is known as the vestibular sense. So this is our sense of movement, and gives us information on how fast our bodies are moving. So again, along with proprioception, vestibular input is another area where we see sensory issues with our kiddos with Down syndrome. So for a lot of them, I've seen, and I'm sure Marla, you've seen this too, a lot of our kids love spinning.
Yes.
A lot of them will sit on our swing in the therapy gym and spin for at least 5 to 10 minutes without getting dizzy.
Oh, yeah.
So that movement is, again, something a lot of them may crave it, and they crave it so that it registers in their nervous system and organizes their nervous system so that they're able to function in everyday life. There are a few of our kiddos that obviously don't like too much. I have a client that I'm thinking of that will sit on the swing, but just very, gentle back and forth. It does not like spinning at all. So for some, it might be overstimulating and they may not seek it or crave it as much, but it is definitely an area, even if a lot of teachers will tell me, like, why is this particular student, fidgeting in their seats? Fidgeting is a big thing with our kiddos. And it's because they're trying to move around to get some sensory input, but also that proprioceptive piece, they're trying to figure out where their body is in space. So it's kind of a dual thing that happens with vestibular.
So for the vestibular input, what comes to mind immediately for me is for people who get motion sick, that is a sign of overactive vestibular sense. Your body is giving you too much information.
Yeah.
And so for our students, it can either be overactive, which is more rare, or underactive. So they need a lot more to give them that sense of balance and internal organization. Is that how you would describe it?
Yeah, absolutely. So their tolerance for vestibular is much higher, so that they need more and more of it in order for it to register on their system.
And that would be why our students don't get dizzy, basically.
Yes, exactly.
They can spin and spin and spin, and like I'm dizzy watching them, and I'm getting I have overactive vestibular sense, so I'm getting sick just looking at them, and they're just having a ball of a time. They're loving it.
For sure. And then as OTs, we kind of have to keep in mind that they may not feel it, they may not feel dizzy at the moment, but we kind of have to also make sure that there's a balance, because they may not feel dizzy, but they might get sick after. So, it's a very fine balance with sensory input. We kind of have to, and it's very, very individual based. But it is definitely something that I've seen over the course of my years of being an OT, that it's a common thread that a lot of our kiddos do seek both vestibular and proprioceptive input, for sure.
Could you talk a little bit about that 8th sense?
So the eighth sense is one that's kind of emerging in the research literature now, and it's called interoception. So this is the sense that we get from our internal body. So our thirst, hunger, temperature, pain, and our bowel and bladder fullness or emptiness. So interoception is also a weakened sense in individuals with Down syndrome, which is why it's very hard for them but why toilet training can be difficult for one thing, because that feeling of bowel and bladder fullness is not as strong in our kiddos with Down syndrome as it would be for somebody as a typical aged or typically developing peer. So if, for you and I, if we can sense like, oh, I kind of have to go pee, but I can wait an hour and then I'll go. For those guys, for our kids with Down syndrome, it has to reach at that really like maximum critical level, exactly, before they can actually sense it. So that's why a lot of our kids, when we're toilet training, will have multiple accidents. Why sometimes when you ask, when parents will be like, oh, do you need to go to the bathroom? And they're like, no, but they probably do. The sense has not told them yet that they need to go. And poor interoception is also why pain management is difficult for our kids. Temperature management is very difficult for our kids. Sometimes you'll see that it's, really cold out. Some of our students, I've seen that it's super, super cold outside and they're coming into sessions in shorts or a light jacket, or vice versa. In the summer, they're coming in heavy coats.
Winter coat.
Yeah. So that's definitely an area that's getting more and more research now, and in helping us understand also the sensory component.
Thank you so much. That was like a brilliant breakdown of all of the senses and how they impact our students.
Yeah.
In terms of what strategies, I think we could save that for an additional 15 podcast episodes. But I think, can we suffice it to say at this point that OTs are there to help you with strategies regarding sort of any of those senses, and able to help you make adaptations and things so that it becomes easier for the student to get through their days?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, like I mentioned earlier, each individual will have their own sensory experiences. They'll change day to day. They can change hour to hour. But our goal as OTs is to figure out each individual's sensory profile and help them understand and help them learn how they can seek the sensory input in a meaningful and in a functional way, so that they get what they need and their nervous system needs, but that it's not in a way that's impacting their learning in all environments.
And not distracting, some of those kind of things.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a related question to the sensory issues that I just wanted to touch on sort of as our last question for today. And that is, why are breaks so important? And this was actually asked to me by a teacher at a school. So they wanted to know, why are breaks so important? And is a rest break the same as a movement break, or is it different?
Yeah, that's a great question. So no, I think rest breaks and movement breaks they serve two different purposes. So, a rest break, for example, they're important when, for example, a child returns home from school where they've been working so hard to stick to someone else's schedule. They're working on processing multiple demands placed on them by the school environment, and having to physically be on for 8 hours. So I often suggest to parents, to give your kids a rest break once they come home from school, or even go home from therapy. Some parents will be like, okay, let's go home and work on this thing that Hina just worked on with you. But, a rest break is so important for everybody, not only our kids with Down syndrome, but because our bodies and our minds need time to recover. They need time to consolidate the information. And so that's kind of where rest break falls into this question. Movement breaks, on the other hand, are important for example, when kids are in school. So from a physical perspective, and you alluded to this a little earlier, a movement break can really help our kids with Down syndrome activate those muscles, those low tone muscles, so that they're able to sit at a table for a while to do some of those difficult fine motor tasks. So when I go into schools, I often ask the teachers to schedule printing or those really tough fine motor activities that require the kid to sit at a table after a movement break. So after recess or after time in the gym, so that they get that physical movement in and their muscles get this activation that allows them to sit at a table for a long time without getting fatigued. And from a sensory perspective, movement breaks are great too, because a lot of the times we need to get up and get our bodies moving to get that proprioceptive sense, to get that vestibular sense, so that our nervous systems are organized and then they're able to focus and pay attention to a particular task.
So I have a couple of follow-up questions for you from that. Let's talk about movement breaks first. And my question for you is, do you feel like on the whole, students with Down syndrome need more movement breaks in their day? And the reason I ask this is because I've also had teachers tell me, well, there's recess, and like, that's what recess is for. Like, everybody goes out and moves around, and that's absolutely true. In fact, every single student needs movement breaks within their day in order to maintain their concentration. But do you think that students with Down syndrome need that more frequently?
Absolutely. Yeah, no, that's a really good question. Yes. The answer to that is yes. So recess it's great, but our kiddos with Down syndrome, given that they have that weak proprioceptive sense and the low muscle tone, given all that, they need movement breaks of what I say higher intensity and higher frequency. So I say to teachers, you don't have to take out your student out of the classroom for a movement break for, half an hour. If they can get a really nice high intensity, high frequency movement break for 5 minutes, it's enough to kind of get them reorganized, their nervous systems reorganized and able to sit down. So for example, a quick obstacle course of jumping up and down on the trampoline, running and sprinting, carrying a heavy object back and forth, just quick little bursts, but of high intensity. So they definitely, to answer your question, need more at a higher intensity and more often throughout the day.
So in that situation, walking the halls is not a movement break.
No.
Or not intense enough to help reorganize the student, I guess is how I would rephrase that.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
And then in terms of rest breaks, you and I collaborate about several students. And in fact, I just wanted to clarify that sometimes we do recommend a rest break for younger students during the day at school.
Absolutely.
Especially if the students are younger and are used to having rest midday at home, then in fact, having a rest, like a real rest, either a nap or a lie down somewhere where there aren't demands placed on them, will help them be much more successful, especially for that afternoon period of school that can be really challenging.
Yeah. And I think that's a really good point. Thank you for bringing that up. And I think for young kids, and I can think of a couple of our teenagers that we share that, that can be important for as well, especially given the fact that our population has a higher incidence of sleep apnea. So the teenager that I'm thinking of, his teacher understands that this kiddo will need like a quick 20-minute power nap, half an hour power nap, so that he is able to focus and get the most out of his schoolwork in the afternoon. And that's just the way it is. But that kind of a rest break can also be important for older kids as well. Yeah.
And one of the things that I find myself telling parents is, you can choose whether you want to do battles all afternoon or you want to do a nap, even though maybe that's not what the peers are doing. But if you want more out of your school day in terms of progress and academics, etc., like I know what I would choose, and I would go for the nap.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
Take those 20 minutes rather than having, lay down, sit down strikes for your whole afternoon.
Absolutely.
So that is,
definitely
that's where
agree.
I stand on that.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. And honestly, these teachers, once they kind of trial that idea, they do find a big difference in how their students can function in the afternoon. And
and it really makes everybody's lives easier, because the staff or the supporters or the teachers also don't want to have a student who's miserable all afternoon and unable to concentrate and unable to learn. Like that's nobody's best case scenario at all.
Exactly.
So, there's workarounds that are optional for that.
Yeah.
Hina, it is always a pleasure to pick your brain and figure out the ways that OTs think about things. I think it's helpful for every other discipline to have an OT that works with them, because I just get so much out of it. And I feel like I understand our students so much better after I've had your input on what could be going on or what could we try to sort of help find solutions. So I super appreciate it, and I know our
Thank
listeners
you. I appreciate
will too.
that. Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think, and vice versa, I think, a collaborative model in working with our individuals with Down syndrome is the best way to go. And that's what I love about working at Dsrf is that, I have teachers and speech language pathologists there so that I can, really not only give you advice, but get advice from you guys as well. And it really, at the end of the day, makes such a big difference for our clients. So thank you.
Oh, absolutely. The more brains, the better.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you for allowing me to nerd out on OT stuff with you for a bit. That was fun.
Anytime. All right. Well, we will definitely have you back again as a guest to talk about toileting and some of those other really complex topics in the future. So I hope our listeners stay tuned and wait for those.
Yeah, for sure. Sounds great.
Next week on the Lowdown, a Down syndrome podcast.
For me, the real question is, does it benefit the student? And if you cannot answer yes to that question, then you're not helping the student. So for example, people might say, oh, well, my child is getting removed from the class so they can work one-to-one with someone. Well, is it benefiting them in order to work one-to-one with that person? Yes. Great.
Yeah.
Or would it benefit them more to stay in and be part of community circle for that session? Yes. Then do that. I think that it can get very, very difficult to separate when you start to wade into what is inclusion. I think it's very easy to say we should always include. Yes. But the actual fact of things is we need to make sure that we're meeting our students' needs.
The Lowdown, the Down Syndrome podcast, is a production of Down Syndrome Research Foundation. Learn more at dsrf.org and join the conversation at Dsrf Canada on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. The Lowdown is hosted by Marla Fodan and Hina Mahmood and is produced by Glenn Hughes. The Lowdown theme music and Just Do was written and recorded by Rick Scott.